No politician in history, and I say this with great surety, has been treated worse or more unfairly. You can't let them get you down. You can't let the critics and the naysayers get in the way of your dreams. I guess that's why we won.
And that was a commencement speech. And welcome back to AM Joy. Donald Trump feels like he's getting picked on. So today we decided to bring in someone who can give a fair and honest assessment of how he's done so far as president. And joining me now is the host of MSNBC's hit show, The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell.
Joy,
in the first word of the hour.
I want to thank you for delaying the broadcast of your show today so that I could sleep late. That was so nice. And the guys, the crew is really grateful.
You don't respect soccer enough, I think, if you slept through that.
Is that what was going on?
Yeah, that was what was happening. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, there was also a speech.
Yes, I saw the speech.
Yeah, so what did you think of Donald Trump sort of resetting himself? No more radical Islamic terrorism.
Well, given where he was, he did work in a significant amount of that. I think he, obviously very different stylistically from the campaign, and he didn't condemn the entire religion, which he's done before. So when this president doesn't condemn the entire religion, people are saying, oh, he abandoned his base.
Yeah.
But so what he did for his base was use a lot of the words they wanted to hear in front of that audience. But that I don't think any of them bet that the first foreign trip was going to be to the home country of the 9/11 attackers, and the phrase 9/11 would not dare be mentioned by this president of the United States.
And not only that, but he had his son-in-law cut that sweet deal, $100 billion deal for a sort of arms deal on the way in the door. It is all very transactional, but I am struck by the fact that we toddled over and checked out the Drudge Report this morning, which was just glowing about the horse-drawn carriages. They love the pomp and circumstances. The guy who you beat up on every night ratings-wise, Sean Hannity, I'm sure will endorse fully whatever it is that Donald Trump said.
They love the Saudi dictatorship today, as long as the Saudi dictatorship is welcoming Donald Trump.
Right.
That's all it takes to get that kind of cheer from that kind of media.
It's interesting that even the curtsy, right? I mean, when President Obama...
have we decided it's a curtsy?
I think it was a curtsy. Yeah, it was a sort of a pretty princess move. It was lovely.
So it's not a bow.
No,
would a bow be bad?
A bow would be bad if Barack Obama did it. And I am convinced, and I don't know if you're going to give us the fair and balanced assessment here, but had Trump done a full bow, a complete and full bow, would he not have still gotten a pass from his friends on the right?
They'd find a way, apparently. They would find a way, and so they always have. But he's at his weakest point so far. This is the weakest point he's been in, even with his own supporters. The polls indicate that. And so there's a spot somewhere on the calendar where everything looks wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you were the pro-Nixon network on his second inauguration, okay, he won a landslide victory. He wiped out George McGovern and wiped out the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party had no idea, like, what do we do presidentially after this? So you were in a fantastic business if you were running the pro-Nixon network on the day of his inauguration, and 18 months later you were out of business.
Yeah.
And so somewhere along that line, there was the abandonment of Nixon. But it wasn't 120 days in.
Well, and I'm glad you went there, because that is one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you today, because I think we've all been sort of gorging on sort of Nixon nostalgia, looking at what's happening to Donald Trump 120 whatever days in. But one of the things that strikes me personally is that when we talk about impeachment, in Nixon's case, you had Republicans. They weren't in the majority, but they were willing to turn on the president publicly and say so. In this case, you've had absolute obedience out of even the leadership of the House and the Senate. And I see no change in that, no matter what happens.
Well, a lot of this has to do with who the members of Congress actually are now. And they truly, in every sense, are not the same people they used to be. There are, and this is on both sides, but people who run for the House of Representatives in order to be lobbyists. They want to do 4 years, 6 years, and get a job on K Street and wildly increase their income. That's not who used to run for the House on either side, in either party. And by the way, running for the House of Representatives as a Republican in the Nixon era was almost a selfless act. You were running into the permanent minority in the House of Representatives,
right,
where you would never be allowed in the room by the Democrats running the House on any governing decision. And so those people, when you look at who they were, they had much more nobility of purpose than the current makeup, and that's and you know, and it's true on both sides, by the way. I mean, the personnel quality level has dropped dramatically in the Congress, and so that's something we haven't talked about in this delayed, if it is that delayed, reaction to what is really going on in Trump world.
And it strikes me that, because I agree with you, I don't think that we give too much credit to the Democrats if we just say that only Republicans sort of lack the sort of strength of action.
No, but
Democrats, when they saw that the Obamacare was going to hurt them, a lot of them just decided not to run or left Congress. You saw a lot of people say, you know, they took the Evan Bayh route and said, we're just going to be out, too much partisanship, I'm done. You're not even seeing that, though, on the Republican side.
Yeah, but once you look at the names of the Republicans who were part of communicating to Nixon that this is over, or the names of the Republicans who were serious about digging into this, you know, Howard Baker, you look at that list and you just tell me, take your time. Who's the Howard Baker in the Republican Senate right now?
I can't find them because the people that the media, that our profession tends to give a lot of laurels to, the Lindsey Grahams and John McCains, they still 100% back the president, and they still use their time. Lindsey Graham uses a lot of his time when he's doing committee hearings to still go after Hillary Clinton's emails.
Yeah, and I think a certain amount of what you're watching there is Lindsey Graham knowing who his voters are.
Sure.
And so if I'm the president and I'm watching Lindsey Graham, I'm terrified of him because I see the direction he's going, and I don't care if he throws off, some fire to his voting base in South Carolina. Why is he still coming in this direction after me, the president? So, in the Nixon era, you saw, first of all, the difference between the parties was much less. In fact, so you saw people, quote, work their base much less because the gap between a moderate Republican, which most of them were, and a moderate Democrat, which most of them were, was something that people wouldn't even recognize today, right? And so they didn't. They didn't have to play around in the ways that Lindsey Graham might be. But I always watch what they're doing. I always watch, okay, what is he doing? And he's having a hearing about what? And he wants what? I don't care what, political stuff he says on the side. None of what Lindsey Graham's doing is good news for the Trump White House.
Well, and if you were, take yourself back to sort of being, if you were a staffer to a Republican senator up for re-election in 2018, what do you see as a bigger risk? Abandoning Donald Trump and getting a primary challenge or losing Republican support, right? Or sticking with Donald Trump and either having historical infamy or winding up on the wrong side if he goes down?
I personally would advise any senator in that situation to stick with his own, her own actual view of the situation. Play it honest with your voters, because that's one of the things I know in politics it's usually a last resort. It's like, oh, I can't get away with this, I can't get away with that, I can't get away with that. Oh, okay, I guess I'll tell the truth. And so, but in this instance, it's your only guide, because Trump is too erratic a thing to align yourself with. It's just too erratic. And so the voters will recognize, most of them in most states will recognize that you're just being honest about it. Bernie Sanders' rise, I think, was fueled almost entirely by the sense that this guy's honest. And you know what one of the biggest indicators was that this guy's honest? It was okay with him if you called him a socialist.
Right.
And he would say, yeah, I am. And everyone in America knows, wow, that's the worst word you can have beside your name in American politics, other than possibly Muslim. And he just says it. He must be honest.
Right.
Like the actual particulars that follow that, are less important than his. And by the way, that's not something I believed at the outset. It's something a theory I developed as I watched this. And so, I worked for a senator whose default position was honest. He is a liberal Democrat, who would win every upstate county, every Republican upstate county except for one. And he would go into these town halls, Senator Moynihan, and they would ask him, why you're supporting funding for AIDS research, and my wife has breast cancer, and why aren't you, and all that. And he would answer the question. He wouldn't duck the question. And most of the people in the Republican town halls that I'd see him in upstate would leave the building completely disagreeing with 80% of what he said. And the overhear that you would get as they're going out the door, well, he sure is smart and he sure is honest.
Yeah.
And they'd end up voting for him.
And this is the question I have, because I do want to talk about the Democrats just a little bit, because it does seem, I mean, they cannot count on, Bernie Sanders isn't even a member of the party. They do need some sort of a leader, someone to rally around. You still have a lot of division between the Sanders and Clinton factions in the party. They don't seem to have much unity. California just had a race for the leader of the Democratic Party there in the state. It was very divisive. Black woman lost, establishment guy won. There doesn't seem to be a lot of, I don't know, leadership nationally. Do you see anyone emerging who could actually lead?
Here is exactly how worried I think the Democratic Party should be about that concept. In January of 1973, George McGovern had lost 49 states. I mean, like maybe 1, 2. I don't know. I can't remember. Wiped out, total wipeout.
Yep.
And he was this extreme. The most liberal candidate the Democrats have ever nominated was George McGovern, and so liberalism was crushed because they lost. And it became this pariah within the party. But you know, they can't go conservative. And you say, well, who's the leader? Who's the leader? Well, and how are we going to do anything? The next president of the United States is literally a guy no one's ever heard of in 1973, Jimmy Carter. Okay, he wasn't. There was no leader of the party. There was no leader of the party. They did just fine in the next presidential election.
But are we in the same sort of? I mean, in the current cycle where it's literally. I mean, we're 121 days into Donald Trump. The cycle is so compressed. It's so fast that it does, in a lot of ways, feel like the Democrats are simply a vacuum. There are certain people. There's Maxine Waters, who's really exciting to a lot of people. People don't think she's running for president, right? So there are leaders of pieces of the party, but it does feel like without someone to speak for them, the Democrats do feel like they are all over the place. Can they wait for?
Yeah, but I mean, you have to understand, inside professional politics, when the other side is collapsing, nobody worries about. In fact, usually this is what they want. They want to be out of the line of fire, because remember, what you might think of as a Democratic leader is a target for hatred by the Trump side, by Republicans.
Right.
So you don't any longer get to stand up and say, hey, I'm Mike Mansfield. I'm the Democratic leader of the United States Senate. I would like to have all the respect that comes with that. It's like, no. You are the target of our heat-seeking missiles when you come up and you become Nancy Pelosi or you become Chuck Schumer. And so the presidential candidates who we're going to see, like Elizabeth Warren and possibly Kamala Harris and others, I think they're all playing it exactly right, which is they don't want to rise to the level of being the target now of the heat-seeking missiles. Although I think you're going to see they're going to go after Elizabeth Warren as much as they can, because their side bets that she is the most viable candidate, and so they want to harm her. You notice Trump wants to harm her whenever he can. He will reach out and harm her. He doesn't worry about Chuck Schumer running against him for president. He does worry about her. And so I actually think the shape of the Democratic Party in our public consumption of all these stories is just about right. In other words, they're not in them. They don't have to be, because it's the Washington Post versus Donald Trump today, and the Washington Post won, and it's the New York Times versus Donald Trump today, and the New York Times won. Donald Trump's losing every day. When you're on the Democratic side, on the inside with the door closed among the professionals, they just go, okay.
People have described it, the Washington Post versus New York Times, as basically newspaper Game of Thrones, and we are really here for it. You did leave out The Rock, though. I think he wants to be president.
Yeah, I saw that last night. There's a real possibility.
We have learned nothing as a country. My good friend Lawrence O'Donnell, thank you so much for coming in on a weekend. I really appreciate it.
Fun.
This was fun. We should just do this like every weekend. We'll have you back. We'll make you do it again. Thank you very much. And of course, you can catch The Last Word weeknights at 10 p.m., which you already do, which is why he's winning. Sorry, Sean Hannity. And coming up, the legacy of Roger Ailes. That's next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.